Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast, our movie review podcast right here on Arrow Entertainment. This is Cinemacast. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button down below. All the links for our social medias and our streaming platforms are also in the description section if you guys want to follow us on there. So let's take a look at a new one, a brand new one that opens in theaters or is open in theaters already, depending on when you watch this review, May 16th. Final Destination Bloodlines. That is today's feature, guys. This is the first Final Destination movie within a span of 14 years. Yes. The last Final Destination film came out in 2011, which was Final Destination 5. And even though this is labeled as the sixth entry in the franchise, gotta say that this is also marks 25 years. Yes. 25 years ago, the first Final Destination movie came out in theaters, and it was known for being a supernatural thriller movie. Well, now it's considered a supernatural horror movie. But you all know the premise of the Final Destination movies. You got one particular person, one teen or adult, who ends up having premonitions of an event that happens well at the beginning of the movie, of so many people dying tragically and horribly, and which ends up leading to their death, to where it turns out it's nothing but a premonition. And then it comes right back to a simple point of the period where something happens that feels like deja vu to them. They know something's getting ready to happen, so they begin to warn everybody, which in the end ends up, they end up looking crazy or sounding crazy, but then once they get out of that situation and death takes its toll on everybody else who stays behind, and then lo and behold, the incident or the event happens just as the premonition called for. So in these movies, once an event like this happens, and those who escape death are bound to meet death's fate once again throughout the movie, unless our titular protagonist finds a way to cheat death or stop death. Even the tagline for one of the movies was "You can't cheat death," and I think it was the second one, maybe. Nah, it wasn't the second one. It might have been the first one. I can't remember. But there was a tagline on one of these movies where it's like, yep, it's the first one. You can't cheat death. And these movies, they have spectacular gore and kill scenes in them where, everything just happens to happen in a certain motion. And there was a word for it that I seen somewhere, and I've seen it when reading up on this, and it has something to do with the oh god, I had it and I don't even know where it is at. Alright, so this movie falls in the timeline in a very specific way. Now, with a lot of different franchises, even horror related, like Halloween or Friday the 13th or such, there's always a timeline that fits in somewhere. And it begins to feel all very confusing unless you do some proper research and follow up on what the timeline actually is. Now, if you go into watching the Final Destination films in order up until Final Destination 5, to me, when I first seen the fifth one, everything kind of felt like it was all coming right back around full circle, in a sense. But in reality, Final Destination 5 was the prequel to Final Destination, the very first one. So how odd is that for the timeline, where Final Destination 5 falls as the beginning, in a sense, of that whole timeline? It happened before, the flight, the event with the flight and everything else. So Final Destination 5 was originally the prequel, which in the timeline is the first to happen, and then it falls down the line with Final Destination 1, 2, 3, and the Final Destination, which I guess they were trying to say it was the Final Destination, but it wasn't the Final Destination. So I don't know where they were thinking of, where they were going with that. And to me, Final Destination 5 was probably the weakest entry for me, especially since there is a scene in there where it turns the whole movie into a slasher, where somebody who is familiar with the main characters in the end tries to kill off one or both of them. That's all I remember. And then something happens. So yeah, that happened with it. Now this movie, however, it pretty much ties in the entire loop for all these movies. This movie has a flashback to way before the events of the other movies, and then continuing on now in the year 2025 with the rest of this movie. Now, this one doesn't particularly feel much like a typical Final Destination film in a sense. This movie is actually a little bit more in depth with a story, a little bit more in depth with its characters, and there's not as many people that die off in this movie as there have been in other entries in the series, so to say. Now, I will go into some spoilers here. If you don't want to hear any of the spoilers, if you want to go into this movie without any spoilers, stop the review right here. Go check out Final Destination Bloodline, and then come back and finish the rest of my review. If not, here we go. So this movie stars Caitlin Santawana, I should say, as a college student who inherits her grandmother's sudden premonition about the collapse of a tower years ago and tries to save her entire family after they start dying one by one. Now, when it says Bloodlines, it does mean family. So there is a scene particular in this film where this teenage girl is trying to figure out everything that has happened from a particular time, which takes place in the year 1968. So yeah, about 32 years before 2000. The very first incident happened. The very first premonition incident happened with a woman named Iris Campbell, and her early on character, her young character, was played by Breck Bassinger, and that is a new name for me, Bassinger. I mean, it sounds familiar. It might be Basinger. I don't know, but yeah. And then her older self is played by Gabrielle Rose. Now, that name I have seen or heard of in some familiar movies throughout the 90s and all, such as Collateral Damage with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think that's the one I'm thinking of. No, it was a Canadian short, but she was in the movie Time Cop with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Double Jeopardy with Tommy Lee Jones, and a few others, that are pretty much well known in a sense, but you get the drift. So anyway, this woman, Iris, in 1968, her and her fiance, Paul, they were attending to an opening ceremony to the Sky View Restaurant Tower. And that is the tower that you see in the photo, in the poster right there. It's not the Eiffel Tower. It's a tower where the restaurant is in a glass dome at the very top. And she begins to be feeling kind of weary about it. And little things start happening here and there. Yeah, and you got to think, like, even the floor to this restaurant in the air is made of glass. So yeah, everything just starts to tamper on a little bit with this movie already. So you see the premonition where things start happening, the floor starts to collapse, people start falling to their death, and we're talking like a couple hundred meters down to their death. And of course, she ends up, the last one dying, with this child who is left behind, this young black child who will play a role in the future of this film. And trust me, it's a great big twist that I didn't even see coming, until it was said. So eventually, when she came back to herself, she was able to stop a couple events that pretty much stopped the tower from collapsing and everything from stopping. Pretty much saved everybody's life in the tower around that time. So after seeing the premonition, and not a whole lot really happened. So she did save the lives of everybody in that tower as it happened. And the most funniest thing about that entire scene is the fact that they got this mediocre band playing, and they're playing the Isley Brothers Shout, and everybody just starts stomping up and down on this glass floor, and there's already a chip in the floor as is, and just the glass starts to crack underneath. But then when she comes in and she says, stop dancing, there's a crack in the glass. And then that was that. Everything was just pretty much put on stop. Everybody moved out. Everybody evacuated calmly. And that was that. And then, of course, fast forward, as they say, 56 years to the year 2025, where this young girl is having nightmares of this event, of this woman named Iris. And it turns out it is her great-grandmother. So she decides to go visit some family outside of college and ask some questions about her great-grandmother Iris, I think it's her grandmother or great-grandmother. I think it was her grandmother who survived that. And nobody wanted to talk to her because everybody felt like she was nuts, she was crazy, she was pretty much separated herself from all of society, all of family, including her mother growing up. So there's a little bit of family history with the grandmother and the mother leaving their children, because everybody thought they were crazy for dealing with these kind of things that are happening. So she eventually finds her grandmother, and her grandmother turns her onto this scrapbook that she has been pretty much creating most of her life of all these people who have died from 1968 on up. And it turns out that everybody that survived that night, everybody that she saved, they all cheated death, went on to have lives that they were not supposed to have, went on to having families that they weren't supposed to have. And so everybody in every bloodline that pretty much survived that night, everybody was killed off one by one in a matter of 56 years, including those in the 2000 up to 2011 movies in the franchise. So pretty much everybody who died was pretty much of a bloodline that survived in there. So, Bloodlines pretty much connects all the other movies in a sense as to why this was happening to everybody, why death was ping-ponging from person to person to person in each individual sequel. And it made sense, but then it didn't make sense. And of course, Iris eventually does make her end, after she talks with her granddaughter, because she's locked herself in this house that has kept her safe all this time. And then lo and behold, she ends up stepping outside to hand her granddaughter the book one last time. And then boom, she is dead right in front of her. And then now death is falling down the timeline, the bloodline of everybody. So who's going to be next? Well, I'm not going to spoil that for you guys. I will let you guys go into it. But let's just say the death scenes, they are not as grotesque as they are in the previous entries. So if you're going into this looking for some very grotesque deaths, I wouldn't look too forward for anything. I mean, we've seen probably the best of the best when it comes to death scenes, when it comes to this movie. We've probably already seen that. As I was reading a review from Discussing Films on Twitter, and they said that the kills feel like Looney Tunes based kills, like it was something out of Looney Tunes, but it was also a little bit more terrifying in a sense, felt a little bit more realistic, but just the kills were absolutely ridiculous. And I think they were. They absolutely were, especially one particular kill a little over halfway into the movie, which involves a couple people. I'm not going to say who, but let's just say, yeah, it was pretty ridiculous. It was something that, it wasn't as graphic as I thought it would be or anybody else would think it would be. I think this movie relies a lot more on the story and the character development of each individual character in the movie as it should, really. And even though the other movies almost kind of felt like a gore fest, kind of like the Saw movies. When Saw comes out, you don't care too much about the story. You care about the kills, how people are going to get killed in a new, grotesque way. And that's how these movies became. But then this is pretty much, I would say it's kind of a soft reboot, but it's not really a reboot. It's just something that's a little bit different, testing the waters with this film. And I think it executes it pretty well in only a matter of 110 minutes. And looking back on the other films, if I look at the other Final Destination films, so the first Final Destination was only 98 minutes, which was short, but it fit a lot in there with the kills, with the with everything. The second one was 90 minutes. Final Destination 3 was 93 minutes. The Final Destination was 82 minutes, probably the shortest one in the series, and then 92 minutes for the Final Destination, Final Destination 5. So the Final Destination, the fourth entry, which was the shortest entry at 82 minutes. So Final Destination Bloodlines is the longest in the franchise at 110 minutes. That is almost 2 hours, guys. It's 1 hour and 40 minutes. So this is the longest entry in there, and it does do a lot of explanation, and it tries to get you hooked with the story, with the characters, and it fits you in there pretty well. And while you're sitting there waiting for the next spectacular kill, you're waiting to see who's next. You're waiting to see how they die. And it may end up being a complete letdown for you. If this is something that you came to see, you're either going to feel satisfied or you're going to feel let down. And I feel like it was a little bit of both for me, but I do enjoy a good story. And for this movie to pretty much tie everything in the way it did with a timeline and how it pretty much labeled out how, okay, this is how all the other kids and the other movies pretty much died off. Now, one thing I will say, now recently actor Tony Todd passed away last year, November 6, 2024. And he passed away stomach cancer. He had stomach cancer. And he was probably considered a legend in the horror film business. He was a horror icon to a lot of people. He starred in a lot of movies. The first movie that I've seen him in was The Candyman, and that's his most famous role right there, was Candyman. And another role that I loved him in was Tom Savini's remake of Night of the Living Dead, which was very brilliant from Tom Savini. And for Tony Todd to star in that, I absolutely loved him in that role. And of course, him as William Bloodworth, or basically the guy that works in the morgue at in the Final Destination films. He's basically the warden of the morgue or whatever. So you see him in the first and the second. He was absent in the third and the fourth entries, but he made his return in Final Destination 5, and he is back in Final Destination Bloodlines. This is the last role that he was in before his death, and it is also made in the memory of Tony Todd. And there is a big twist in this movie linking to his character. And this is a big twist. This is a big spoiler. Once again, you don't want to hear any spoilers, guys. Shut it off now and go watch the movie. So Tony Todd's character is named JB. And JB was the young black child that survived that night in 1968 on this tower. He was one of the ones that was thankfully enough to escape death after so long and cheat death. And of course, he's working around death. He's working in a fucking morgue in a hospital and giving out advice on how to cheat death and stuff throughout most of these movies. And it turns out that he was a victim himself in the very first incident that happened, and he was one of the ones that was saved by this woman Iris. And of course, the reasoning for this girl who starts getting premonitions and nightmares of her grandmother's because she was diagnosed with cancer. And it all happened around the same time that her granddaughter started having these nightmares. So yeah, death eventually starts coming to you as a warning. And then when it takes the next person, it goes right on down the bloodline. And of course, the character JB in here, William Bloodworth, and it ends up he turns out that he explains that he has contracted cancer himself and he is dying. And now that his good friend from long ago has finally passed away, he can retire, and he's going to die himself. So yeah, that is a big twist right there, a big twist reveal for his character, that he was actually part of the timeline that has taken place within a matter of 50 some odd years. So the movie does end in a little climax where they try to make it to the grandmother's house to feel like it is a safe place. But turns out, it was a big mistake. Everything starts happening to the point where the young girl, her name is Stephanie, who is played by Caitlin Santawana, she ends up pretty much, as she thinks, like dying in a sense, and then is resuscitated by her brother. So they think that they broke the chain, as has been in several other movies in the franchise. And of course, the ending, it's a Looney Tunes based ending in a sense. You got a spectacular death that does happen that is not foreseen, just as it is in the other films. So if you're expecting a good ending or good happy ending, you're not going to get one out of this movie. So more likely this could be the last film, who knows, but just know if they do another Final Destination, there will be no more Tony Todd. He has retired his character from here before he passed away. So rest in peace, Tony Todd. You will never be missed. You are a horror icon. You're a horror legend. So yeah, this movie, I will say, when I went into it with very low expectations, because I've been watching a lot of movies lately that were very bland, very dull, very lackluster. And this one, I almost kind of had hopes for that kind of nature with it, but turns out I actually did enjoy this film, even though it was nothing like the other entries. But I think it fit in here in a sense where it ties everything together. It ties very few characters together from the other movies very well, and it does it in a it just does it in a pleasing, it's just very satisfying. It's very pleasing and satisfying with how they reveal certain characters and certain events and such, and why the movie is called Bloodline, and why the grandmother says you have to protect the bloodline, you have to protect and save the family. So there is a reasoning behind it. It is very clever on their part. They've done pretty well with it, I believe. And even though I'm revealing this right before the movie comes out, because I did see this movie before it came out, I have my resources. Already, a review aggregator on through Rotten Tomatoes gave this movie, well, it actually dropped a grade, I think. It was 94 earlier, so now it's sitting at 93%. Of 59 critics' reviews are positive. The website's consensus reads, adding some surprising emotional layers onto the ghoulish bones of the Final Destination mythology. Bloodlines ingenuously executes grisly set pieces with precision and turns impending doom into outrageous fun. Even Metacritic assigned the film a score of 74 out of 100 based on 19 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews, which means this movie, more likely, it will be well received, or should be well received by fans of the series. Now, there may be some fans that may feel tongue-in-cheek with this movie in a sense. They may feel a little bit sour, but you gotta think, like, There hasn't been one of these movies since 2011. It's a 14-year gap where we thought that the franchise was just done. Like, they just ran out of steam, ran out of fuel. But it's not taking the formula and recycling it. It's taking the formula, breathing new life into it, and giving it a whole new monster engine. And that's basically what it's doing. It's basically giving it a whole new life, a whole new meaning. So you got the same old premonitions that are happening. You know, you got these deaths that are, yes, they are pretty outrageous to say. As it has been stated, they're like Looney Tunes based deaths. You know, it's comical in a sense. I guess because of the way the CG is and the way people do die, which can give you a chuckle. You know, some of these movies really do that. But other than that, I think this movie does extremely well. And I think it was received very well. And I believe that this movie, a rating that I can give it would be a 9 out of 10. I did enjoy this movie. There wasn't a whole lot that I expected out of it, especially since it's the longest in the franchise. There's not a whole lot of death scenes to it. There's not a whole lot of death comes for you. But even though there's a lot of explanation to the background, to the story, and I think some of the characters you will like, some of the characters you will be thankful that they are killed off. So I do give Final Destination Bloodlines a 9 out of 10. Now, what did you guys think about this movie? Did you guys check this out after the review has been placed? Do you guys like this movie? Do you guys hate this movie? What are you guys' thoughts on the movie and the franchise? Let me know down in the comments section, guys. And that is it for today, for today's episode of Cinemacast. Thank you for joining me today for today's feature, Final Destination Bloodlines. If you enjoy the content right here on the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button down below. And as always, guys, thank you very much once again for being right here with me. And until next time, I will catch you right back here to cinema.